What you're about to hear sounds impossible. A man picks up what he thinks is a clod of dirt during an ordinary evening walk, and what he finds hidden inside will leave you speechless. But the real twist? It comes at the very end. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special about it. The kind of forgettable autumn evening where the sky turns that dull gray, and you just want to get home. James had clipped the leash onto Cooper, grabbed his jacket, and headed out. Same route. Same time. Same everything. Cooper, a black and white border collie with more energy than sense, was already 10 steps ahead, nose glued to the ground like he was solving a crime. James barely noticed. His mind was somewhere else entirely. Bills. A leaking kitchen tap. Whether he'd remembered to reply to his sister's message. The kind of stuff that fills your head when you're not paying attention to anything. And then Cooper stopped. Not slowed down. Not paused. Stopped dead. Ears up. Body locked. His nose twitched once, twice, and then he bolted, ripping the leash clean out of James's hand and crashing through a gap in the hedgerow. "Cooper! Cooper, get back here!" Nothing! Just the sound of rustling bushes and silence. James swore under his breath, quickened his pace, and ducked through the gap after him. He found Cooper 20 meters down a narrow dirt path that ran parallel to the main road. The dog was standing completely still, staring at the ground with an intensity James had never seen before. Not excitement, not playfulness, something else. "What have you found, boy?" James crouched down. There, half buried in the hard-packed earth, sat what looked like nothing more than an oddly shaped lump of dried mud, about the size of a grapefruit. Unremarkable. The kind of thing you'd step over without a second thought. But Cooper wouldn't stop whining. James reached out and poked it with his finger. Hard, rough, heavy. He almost left it there. Almost stood up, brushed off his knees and walked home. But something nagged at him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He scraped away a thin layer of dried mud with his thumbnail, and what he saw underneath made his stomach drop. It wasn't rock. It wasn't clay. It was soft. And when he pressed lightly on it, it moved, pulled back inward, almost like skin. "What on earth?" he whispered. His hands were trembling now. Cooper pressed his nose against the lump and let out a low, insistent whine, the kind he reserved for thunderstorms and fireworks. James had never seen him this unsettled. Whatever this was, it was alive. Or at least it had been. He lifted it carefully. It was shockingly heavy for its size, dense and cold. He cradled it against his chest and stood up. Cooper looked at him as if to say, "Finally." James didn't go home. He turned around and walked fast, almost jogging toward the village center, his mind racing. Was it an animal? A bird? Something he shouldn't be touching at all? And then he saw it. The familiar green sign of Greenfield Wildlife Rescue. He pushed through the door, and the small bell overhead chimed softly. Rachel, the receptionist, looked up with her usual warm smile. But it disappeared the moment she saw his face. "James, is Cooper all right?" "Cooper's fine," he said, slightly out of breath. He lifted the mud-covered lump with both hands and placed it gently on the counter. "We found this on the path behind Miller's Lane. I think something's inside it. Something alive." Rachel leaned in, then pulled back. "Hold on, let me get Dr. Mitchell." Dr. Sarah Mitchell appeared moments later, tall, steady, mid-30s. The kind of person who could calm a room just by walking into it. She'd been the head vet at Greenfield for almost a decade. She'd treated everything from foxes hit by cars to owls tangled in fishing line. Very little surprised her anymore. But when she saw the object on the counter, she paused. "Let's get this onto the table," she said quietly. James carried it to the examination room and set it down under the bright overhead light. Dr. Mitchell pulled on gloves and began working delicately, scraping away the layers of dried, compacted earth with a surgical pick and her fingertips. Nobody spoke. Cooper sat perfectly still at James's feet, watching. Minutes passed. Then Dr. Mitchell stopped. Her hands hovered. Her eyes widened just slightly. The kind of reaction you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. "Rachel," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Warm cloth. Isotonic solution. Now." Rachel was back in seconds. Dr. Mitchell soaked the cloth and began gently dissolving the remaining crust of mud, working in slow, careful circles, and then they saw it. tiny spines, a small curled body, a nose no bigger than a pencil eraser. It was a hedgehog, buried alive in a shell of dried mud so thick and hard it had become a prison. The little creature was curled into a tight ball, trembling barely alive. Its breathing was shallow. Its body was ice cold. "Oh no," Rachel breathed. "He must have fallen into wet mud that dried and hardened around him," Dr. Mitchell said, her voice carefully steady. "He's hypothermic, severely dehydrated. Honestly," she paused, shaking her head, "it's a miracle he's still breathing." James felt something tighten in his chest. He looked down at Cooper, who hadn't moved an inch. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" Cooper's tail gave a single, slow wag. That night, the hedgehog, whom Rachel had already started calling Bramble, was placed in an incubator with a heat pad and a tiny dish of water. Dr. Mitchell didn't go home. She stayed at the clinic, checking on him every hour, adjusting the temperature, monitoring his breathing. By morning, Bramble had moved. Not much. Just a slight uncurling a millimeter of space between his nose and his belly. But it was enough. "Good morning, little guy," Dr. Mitchell whispered, allowing herself the smallest of smiles. The first real breakthrough came 3 days later. Rachel was preparing his food a syringe of warm electrolyte solution, when Bramble lifted his head on his own and sniffed the air. It was a tiny gesture, but the whole clinic celebrated it like a victory. Rachel actually teared up, which she later denied. By the end of the first week, he was eating soft food, mashed banana, pureed insects, a specially formulated hedgehog recovery mix that Dr. Mitchell ordered from a supplier she'd used exactly once before, for a case she described as not nearly this bad. James visited every other day. He'd sit quietly beside the enclosure, sometimes with Cooper lying at his feet, and just watch. He told his wife it was to check on the hedgehog. But truthfully, something about that little creature had gotten under his skin. Maybe it was the way Bramble had been so close to death, sealed inside something that looked like nothing. Maybe it was knowing that if Cooper hadn't stopped on that path, if James had been walking just 5 minutes later, Bramble would have died alone in the dirt, and nobody would have ever known. That thought kept him up some nights. Week 2 brought a scare. Bramble stopped eating for almost 36 hours. Dr. Mitchell ran tests, adjusted his diet, and sat with him through a long, anxious night. By dawn, he was eating again tentatively, slowly, but eating. James got the text from Rachel at 6:47 a.m. and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 days. By week 4, Bramble was unrecognizable. The trembling, mud-caked ball that James had carried into the clinic was now a bright-eyed, snuffling explorer poking into every corner of his enclosure, flipping over his food dish, and once managing to wedge himself behind the water bottle in a way that took Rachel 15 minutes to undo. But with recovery came a harder question. "We've healed his body," Dr. Mitchell told James one evening, leaning against the door frame of the clinic. "But I'm worried we've made him too comfortable. If he can't survive on his own out there, releasing him would be a death sentence." They built a transition enclosure, an outdoor pen filled with real soil, leaves, logs, and insects. A miniature version of the wild. The first time they placed Bramble inside, everyone held their breath. He sat still for a long moment. Then his nose twitched, and he began to dig. He foraged. He hid. He explored. He explored. He was ready. The release day was quiet. No fanfare. Just James, Cooper, Dr. Mitchell, and Rachel, standing at the edge of a sheltered woodland clearing half a mile from the nearest road. Dr. Mitchell set the carrier down beside a thick cluster of bramble bushes. She opened the door. Bramble hesitated, his tiny nose working the cool air. Then he took 1 step, 2, 3. He paused, turned back, and looked at them just for a second. And then he was gone, swallowed silently by the undergrowth. Nobody spoke for a long time. Rachel wiped her eyes. James scratched Cooper behind the ears. Dr. Mitchell stared at the spot where Bramble had disappeared and smiled. "You two gave him a second chance," she said softly as they walked back. James nodded. "I just hope he makes it out there. He will." 3 weeks passed. Life went back to normal or something close to it. But their evening walks felt different now. Quieter somehow. Then one night, Cooper's head snapped up mid-walk. His ears went rigid. Before James could react, the dog was pulling hard toward the back garden, barking in that same strange, urgent tone from the night it all began. James's heart hammered as he unlatched the garden gate, and there, sitting calmly on the back doorstep, was Bramble. A little bigger, a little wilder, but unmistakably him. He looked up at James with those small dark eyes and didn't flinch. James knelt down slowly. Bramble waddled forward and nuzzled against his outstretched hand. Cooper lay down beside them both, tail sweeping the ground, and let out a long, contented sigh. James laughed the kind of laugh that comes when you're trying not to cry. It turned out that Bramble hadn't just survived, he'd come home. And some bonds, it seems, don't care much about the difference between wild and tame. They just hold. If this story moved you, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.